Dream of Dracula in Search of the Living Dead by Leonard. We're on chapter 5, and that's that. That's Vlad the Impaler, obviously. Chapter 5, The Gothic Novel and the Sleep of Reason. What? There have been vampires in our 17th century. After the reign of Shaftesbury, of Locke, of Shaftesbury, of Trenchard, of Collins, one does not hear talk of vampires in London, nor even in Paris. Yet, in these two cities, there are money speculators, tax dealers, businessmen who suck the blood of the people in full daylight. But they are not dead at all, though corrupt. These true suckers do not live in cemeteries, but in pleasant palaces. Between 1730 and 1735, one could hear nothing but stories of vampires. They were watched for, their hearts were torn out, they were burned. Like the ancient martyrs whom they resembled, the more they were burned, the more widespread they became. The difficulty was to know whether it was the soul or the body of the dead that ate. It was decided that it was one and the other, light, insubstantial viands like meringues, whipped cream, fruit fondant were for the soul, roast beef for the body. The true vampires are the monks who eat at the expense of the king of the people and of the people. The letter 5 in the Philosophical Dictionary of Francois Voltaire. Great rendering by me there. December 21st. In my defense, I read it well the first time I read it, but December 21st. Winter is a good time for drinking the light that shines in happy eyes. I sit on the number 6 bus, a copy of Willa Cather's My Antonia in my lap. All week, San Francisco has been overcast, but the uniformly gray skies have given way each evening to streaked sunsets that have about them the same rigid loveliness as those that Willa Cather described. The pale, cold light of the winter sunset did not beautify. It was like the light of truth itself, when the smoky clouds hung low in the west and the red sun went down behind them, leaving a pink flush on the snowy roofs and the blue drifts. Then the wind sprang up afresh with a bitter song, as if it said, "This is reality, whether you like it or not." All those frivolities of summer, the light and shadow, the living mask of green that trembled over everything, they were lies, and this is what was underneath. This is the truth. There is no snow in San Francisco, nor the sort of wind that Willa Cather describes, but winter is here just the same. The season of waiting is upon us, the time when the human ache contracts within the bone to a numbness like the memory of snow. Winter is not a season like the others. Summer, spring, fall have a transience about them, but winter is a time when one can believe in but not feel the healing power of change. It is the cold, bad end of things, all the more reason to be refreshed by light. On the number 6 bus, crowded with students on their way to San Francisco State College, my Antonia on my lap, my eyes are not yet cleared of the slow movements the bats made that spent all night charting something for me in a dream. A place, a coast, a country. It seems to me it was an idea of time, but in my sleep it might have been either the past or the future. The bats, without malevolence, indeed, creatures rather friendly to my unconscious, as it deals at night with the idea of vampires, moved their wings patiently before me, urging me to read the message they could pass on but not explain. They beat the air above my dream, making a sound like muffled oars, like the beat of a poem that I read or wrote about time, or on blood, or the goddess Kali, who is the mistress of them both. Cather's skies, soft bats in a dark space streaked with silver. Then there are two girls. One is only a child, 8 years old, in a white fake fur coat, blue wool stockings, and patent leather shoes with imitation silver buckles. She has dark skin and dark eyes in which there is now a look of such intense pleasure that it can no longer be kept secret. It is easy to see what is giving her such joy. She has noticed that the 17-year-old girl across the aisle bears an uncanny resemblance to herself, and now they are both smiling at each other, at the way they are each other, and at the luck that has placed them on facing seats in the number 6 bus. The child can hardly keep still at the mystery thus revealed, but the 17-year-old struggles against more complex impulses. She is wearing a navy blue sweater, a neat gray wool skirt, and brown shoes with brass buckles. In her lap are her school books and a binder that has pictures of basketball players, tennis stars, and football heroes on it. Even as she is responding to the child's joy, she is conscious that she has her own young womanhood to protect, so that her demeanor in the jouncing bus disguises the struggle between her little girl's impulse to giggle and her not yet fully grown woman's cooler decision merely to smile. Meanwhile, the bus lurches, grinds, lumbers. The passengers coming and going interrupt the eye contact between the girls without affecting their intimacy. Finally, the 8-year-old, unable to stand the distance between them any longer, darts across the aisle to sit next to her new friend, and the scene becomes heartbreaking as I watch the intensity of their mutual shyness while they make the lovely small tentatives that will help them learn who they are. Long before that is accomplished, I get off the bus. Before the Gothic novel, there is the nightmare, which, not being a literary genre, can be appreciated privately by every sleeper. The nightmare makes signals in the dark, which, if they can be read and remembered in the daylight, no sane man will ignore. It is in sleep that the raw metaphors of feeling shape themselves to tell us about the motions of our day. A sea on which worms walk, gulped at by primly sensuous lips, caves, heat, slime freezing to malevolent geometries in the eye, or fire crackling, throwing up flames that will not scorch, dissolving Babylonian towers. In the dark there are friends leering through the green glass, or a longed for kiss burning, drowning the sleeper inside the folds of a pupa, whose blank wax eyes glimmer. There is a dream of soiling or a dream of nakedness in which the two parts of one hermaphrodite stare into a single mirror, or a taste of chocolate liquid centered candies, spilling gall into the mouth. Finally, the sleeper backing away, in a yellow light as if there were a yellow sand dune, and I am on it, a dark speck in a yellow light, very yellow. Backing away on yellow, no possibility of any other direction or color. Backing away in an intense yellow light, and I look down to see from my throat to my navel a thin white line, a scar getting whiter, getting ready to part. In the nightmare, the claims of reason and the demands of instinct twine around each other like creepers. There, the lascivious hunger for death is fed. The suicide finishes his work and lives to regret it. Murder, the smiler with the knife between my own teeth. The fingernails buried in the female. Male, feral flesh, the biggest cock in the world fucking. At last, the moon to the orchestrated applause or laughter of mother. Mother, mother, who also wells with the tide. They are bad nights in which the nightmare's tentacles touch our consciousness, and we are left with a head full of raging sky in which daylight and darkness are interchangeable, and the only stars are the bursts of light made by shame as it explodes toward terror. Nightmare is no way to live. To endure it at all, we must wake up, which, if we are sane, will stop the action. If we are not, we join it in the daylight. Our eyes grow feverish, and the hollows beneath them deepen until our friends and lovers taking pity on us, see to it that we are put under restraint. There is more to that dream experience than endless repetitions of clues about ourselves. In those coiled or dead-end corridors, scraps of God's voice, too, can be overheard coming as crooked echoes, making unclear prophecies. There, the residue of forgotten theologies that long ago were cramped inside our chromosomes announce themselves, and the night turns idolatrous. or rings with imperatives like the one Abraham obeyed on the way to Mount Moriah. Sleep is where the otherwise unmystical dreamer tosses in the grip of mystery and commandment. Yeah, I wrote this book, I published it, now I'm reading it. You're quite observant, Bubba. It was in his sleep that John Hay, the hapless 20th century London vampire, acquired his deadly thirst, instructed to it by a dream that tormented him for years. A dream in which he saw a veritable forest of crucifixes, the crucifixes turning into trees. Then a man appeared collecting something from the dripping trees, which seemed at first to be rain or dew, but then it became blood. Hay's attorney related that the prisoner's account is that as the blood was taken, he tried to get near, but could never get near enough, and felt an overwhelming desire for blood, and that the controlling spirit of his was determined that he should have blood. It took High some time to learn how to appease the thirst which the dream left with him. At first he was awkward about the sheer mechanics of how it was to be done, but later he learned, and it was easy to repeat the ritual with successive victims. I hit him on the head. I took the father and mother of William McSwan to the same basement, disposing of them in the same way. There were also the Hendersons, an unidentified woman from Hammersmith, a young man in Kensington, and a girl who said her name was Mary. Finally, there was Mrs. Duran Deacon, whom he shot in the head, then fetched in a drinking glass and made an incision, I think with a penknife, in the side of her neck, and collected a glass of blood, which I drank. Altogether, there were 9 victims before High, whatever his name is, was caught and finally hanged on August 10th, 1949. He was a natty, round-faced little man of 39 with slickly plastered black hair and a smudge of Hitlerian mustache. Well, there you go. Whose defense lawyer made much of the fact that High was completely lacking in sexual interest or activity. What he did not lack was intense religious training and dreams of the Holy Grail. The nightmare, as I have tried to show, is a place to encounter the primeval instincts and the unacknowledged gods without immediately having to pay the price of their recognition. For the writer, his nightmares are the source of metaphors from a landscape, a tropical marshland, beneath a reeking sky, steaming, monstrous, rank, a kind of primeval wilderness world of islands, morasses, and alluvial channels. Hairy palm trunks rose near and far, out of lush brakes of fern, out of bottoms of crass vegetation, fat, swollen, thick with incredible bloom. There were trees misshapen as a dream that dropped their naked roots straight through the air into the ground or into water that was stagnant and shadowy and glassy green, where mammoth milk-white blossoms floated, and strange high-shouldered birds with curious bills stood gazing sidewise, without sound or stir. Among the knotted joints of a bamboo thicket, the eyes of a crouching tiger gleamed. Thomas Mann, in thus chronicling Gustav Aschenbach's glimpse in Death in Venice, of the fouler dimensions of his otherwise austere and disciplined mind. Before the story of his fixation on the beautiful boy Tadzio is finished, Aschenbach has succumbed to his impotent longing for that miasmic world in which perverse gods make strange exactions. It is a nightmare world where his senses reeled in the steam of panting bodies, the acrid stench from the goats, the odor as of stagnant waters. A blind rage seized him, a whirling lust. He craved with all his soul to join the ring that formed about the obscene symbol of the Godhead. Foam dripped from their lips. They drove each other on with lewd gesturings and beckoning hands. They laughed, they howled, they thrust their pointed staves into each other's flesh and licked the blood as it ran down. But now the dreamer was in them and of them. The stranger god was his own. Aschenbach never touched the boy, but that is only because his will had moldered, not because his heart was pure. Aschenbach turned out like a barber's painted doll, dies in Venice, a poor imitation of precisely that young old man who crossed his path and excited his loathing on his arrival in the beautiful crumbling city. For a man whose brilliance had enabled him to renounce sympathy with the abyss, it was a death sufficiently illuminating. Offenbach, one may say, had died even before he closed his eyes. When death came, it was only to find him sitting there in Venice, like the fading carapace, I'm not sure of that word, of a once bright bug, not even in, but fallen out, some obscure ledge of the abyss. It is curious how Mann's name obtrudes itself here in what is intended to be a brief discussion of the Gothic novel, that strange 18th century excrescence into, is it excretions? Excretions into literary history, whose chief ingredients were frightful sex and easy feeling, and yet John Berryman, as subtle and as cranky a critic as ever put his mind to the genre, finds himself dragging Mann in by the heels in his discussion of Matthew G. Lewis's tumescent novel, The Monk. I think I have that. Dragging him in and precipitously, I think, throwing him out. Ambrosio, the protagonist of Lewis's novel, is the man of holiness, a man so pure that in the 30 years of his life spent within the confines of a monastery, he has never been known to transgress a single rule of his order. And Lewis chronicles his fall from grace with wonderful excitement. Berryman, praising him, writes, "The point is to conduct a remarkable man utterly to damnation. It is surprising, after all, how long it takes, how difficult it is to be certain of damnation. This was Lewis's main insight, fully embodied in his narrative, and I confess that such a work as Thomas Mann's Dr. Faustus seems to me frivolous by comparison. Mann's book has admirable essays in it, wide and profound experience, and art subtle to decadence, but maybe the main thing is not there. In The Monk, the main thing is there. Berryman is striking a pose. Certainly, The Monk has the main thing, but so does Dr. Faustus and almost everything else to which Amy Mann, I think it is Mann, isn't it? Put his hand. What is important here is Lewis's great Gothic novel, whose raw and raving quality continues to make claims on our attention. The Monk was published in 1796, and we have Lewis's word for it that it took him 10 weeks to write its 420 pages. I can believe it. Much of the novel's power comes from the sense we have that it is being composed under our very eyes by the pen of a frenzied adolescent in the grip of a lurid vision, writing at top speed. Antonia shrieked. The monster clasped her in his arms, and springing with her upon the altar, tortured her with his odious caresses. Uttering a loud and terrible cry, the monster plunged into the gulf, and in his fall attempted to drag Antonia with him. And this is a low-key pitch of horror. Lewis frequently does better than that, and the harried prose is compelling because he is as deeply shaken by what he is describing as his characters. He is never able to find the point of distance that should keep him calm as he describes the terrific events through which his people move. They are so nakedly himself, their heartbeats, their loins, their hypocrisies are so much his own that one has the feeling that they are merely completing the dark confessions his veins spell. His master creation is, of course, the 30-year-old Friar Ambrosio, whose honeyed name and fabled chastity make him a natural target for our ill wishes. This is exquisite prig. This great good man deserves to fall from some high place, and to the lascivious satisfaction of author and readers alike, he does. He does. The main plot then involves the physical and spiritual destruction of Ambrosio. We see the handsome celibate monk at his devotions. How powerful an effect did my discourse produce upon its auditors? How they crowded around me! What then now is left for me to do? Nothing. but to watch as carefully over the conduct of my brethren as I have hitherto watched over my own. Yet hold, am I not a man whose nature is frail and prone to error? Then he casts his eye on a portrait of the Madonna. Should I meet in that world which I am constrained to enter some lovely female, lovely as you, Madonna? The picture excites him to a suspiciously sensual appreciation. What beauty in that countenance! How graceful is the turn of that head! What sweetness, yet what majesty in her divine eyes! How softly her cheek reclines upon her hand! Oh, if such a creature existed, and existed but for me, were I permitted to twine round my fingers those golden ringlets, and press with my lips the treasures of that snowy bosom, gracious God, should I then resist the temptation? But Ambrosio's virtue is proof against temptation. This reverie is interrupted by a knock at the door. It is Rosario, a young novice whose head was continually muffled up in his cowl. Rosario's devotion to Ambrosio's needs has not escaped his notice. Your attentions charm me, my son. They were intended to. The lovely youth Rosario, who has enchanted Ambrosio, turns out to be the divine Matilda. Having fallen in love with the incorruptible monk, she has chosen this means of being always near him. At length, no longer able to exist in this state of torture, I have resolved to assume the disguise in which you see me. My artifice was fortunate. How, lady, says Ambrosio, can you really hope for my permission to remain amongst us? I will not expose myself to so dangerous a temptation. Temptation, say you? The irrepressible girl replies. Forget that I am a woman. But Ambrosio is adamant. Matilda, you must from hence tomorrow. To which her reply is to draw a poniard in which she rent open her garment and place the weapon's point against her bosom. Tell me, she cries, that I shall remain your friend and your companion, or this poignard drinks my blood. Poor Ambrosio, poor Matthew Lewis. The friar's eyes followed with dread the course of the dagger. She had torn open her habit, and her bosom was half exposed. The weapon's point rested upon her left breast, and oh, that was such a breast. The moonbeams darting full upon it enabled the monk to observe its whiteness. His eye dwelt with insatiable avidity upon the beauteous orb. A sensation till then unknown filled his heart with a mixture of anxiety and delight. A raging fire shot through every limb. The blood boiled in his veins, and 1,000 wild wishes bewildered his imagination. Not to keep my readers in suspense too long, Matilda has her way, though the monk clings to his virtue for a while longer. But first, Ambrosio is to learn that the portrait of the Madonna that he has adorned is in fact a picture of Matilda herself, that she has conveyed to him by various stratagems. This is not a minor detail. The business of the portrait is the untutored novelist's way of telling us that just what the stakes are as Ambrosio falls. He has been lusting for the Mother of God herself. When the seduction is accomplished, it has the simplicity of the inevitable. Propinquity, youth, and opportunity all conspire, and Matilda, for all her innocence, has the devil's own knack for contrivance. Ambrosio has managed to get himself bitten by a cientipede whose venom is fatal. Matilda sucks out the poison, saves Ambrosio's life, and now lies dying in his arms. Feel this heart, father. She took his hand, confused, embarrassed, and fascinated. He withdrew it not. Folded in your arms, I shall sink to sleep. Your hand shall close my eyes forever, and your lips receive my dying breath. The hour was right. All was silence around. No prying eye or curious ear was near the lovers. Nothing was heard but Matilda's melodious accents. Ambrosio was in the full vigor of manhood. Who then can wonder if he yielded to the temptation? Drunk with desire, he pressed his lips to those which sought them. He clasped her rapturously in his arms. He forgot his vows, his sanctity, and his fame. He remembered nothing but the pleasure and opportunity, and forgot in his transports that Matilda was dying of the Siente Pedoro poison. Ambrosio, my Ambrosio, sighed Matilda. Thine, ever thine, murmured the friar, and sunk upon her bosom. That fatal bosom, the very word as Lewis uses it, has the choking fragrance of all the lust filled bedrooms of the world from which adolescents believe themselves to be forever locked out. Now that was on page 109. For the next 117 pages, the reader is deprived of all further sight or sound of Ambrosio and Matilda, and instead must follow the no less strange but considerably less agitated adventures of Don Alfonso and Agnes, Lorenzo and Antonio. I will address myself to that subplot shortly, but first I want to get back to Ambrosio, who has been left in the breathless ecstasy of Keats's famous wish to be pillowed upon my fair love's ripening breast, to feel forever its soft fall and swell, awake forever in a sweet unrest, still to hear her tender taken breath, and so live ever, or else swoon to death. Lewis at least permits his lovers to achieve their ecstasy, but when the burst of transport was past, Ambrosio's lust was satisfied. Pleasure fed and shame usurped her seat in his bosom. Despondency, tears, recriminations follow, but Matilda, serene in her sensual knowledge, and for the time being indifferent to the fatal poison, that we too have forgotten in the long interval since we have seen these lovers, encourages Ambrosio to indulge in those pleasures freely, without which life is a worthless gift, and urging that if love were a crime, God never would have made it so sweet, so irresistible. Persuaded by her blandishments, Ambrosio returns to the delicious fray. Ambrosio has fallen, but he is not yet irrevocably damned. I still say irrevocably, sounds much more powerful. For that, we need now to turn to the neglected subplot, which narrates two stories. One chronicles what happens to Antonia, the beautiful 15-year-old. Well, that's curious. Defenseless virgin who is seen and loved from a distance by the handsome, noble Lorenzo. The other and more complicated story details the adventures of Lorenzo's sister, Agnes, and her lover. Antonia's kinsman, Don Ramon de las Cisternas, of the two stories, the Raymond Agnes romance, is the more interesting and is Lewis's chief preoccupation in the numerous pages that intervenes between Ambrosio's desire for Matilda and its overwrought fulfillment. What do you got, Rob? The adventures of Don Ramond in Germany among bandits, and those of the pregnant Agnes in the hands of the wicked prioress of a community of poor Clares in Madrid, have considerable but not fascinating interest, though they do serve as an excuse for the introduction, on the other hand, of the famous bleeding nun episode, and on the other, to prepare the reader to be concerned for the young Antonia, who is destined to become the next victim of Ambrosio's lust. Once Ambrosio has caught a glimpse of her, he cannot rest until he has accomplished her dishonor. Ambrosio is a remarkable clumsy lecher. On an early occasion, he clasps Antonia to him. Father, Ambrosio, she cried, release me for God's sake. But the licentious monk heeded not her prayers. He persisted in his design and proceeded to take still greater liberties. Antonia prayed, wept, and struggled, terrified to the extreme. Amazingly, though, Ambrosio has already fastened his lips greedily on hers, sucked in her pure, delicious breath, violated with his bold hand the treasures of her bosom, fatal word, and wound around him her soft and yielding limbs. Antonia's innocence is so perdurable that she cannot imagine, though she resists it, what is the evil Ambrosio has in mind. She is soon to learn. This is what the title of the live video says. Matilda, formerly the novice Rosario, who no longer interests Ambrosio sexually, undertakes now to be his minion and works out a plot that will place Antonia in the monk's power. But first, to excite him still more, she shows him the object of his desire in a magic mirror where he sees Antonia. The scene was a small closet belonging to her apartment. She was undressing to bathe herself. The long tresses of her hair were already bound up. The amorous monk had full opportunity to observe the voluptuous contours and admirable symmetry of her person. She threw off her last garment and, advancing to the bath, put her foot into the water. It struck cold and she drew it back again. Though unconscious of being observed, an inbred sense of modesty induced her to veil her charms, and she stood hesitating upon the brink in the attitude of the Venus de Medicis. At this moment a tame linnet flew towards her, nestled its head between her breasts, and nibbled them in wanton play. The smiling Antonia strove in vain to shake off the bird, and at length raised her hands to drive it from its delightful harbor. Ambrosio could bear no more. Despite Matilda's help, Ambrosio is detected in his design upon Antonia by her mother, Elvira, to prevent Elvira's betraying his viciousness to all of Madrid. Ambrosio throttles the life out of her. The murder does not, however, chill his ardor for Antonia, to whom he gives the sleepy potion. Then he conveys her body into the charnel vaults, beneath the Capuchin monastery of which he is the abbot. There, by the side of three putrid, half-corrupted bodies, lay the sleeping beauty. Ambrosio informs her that, for your sake, fatal beauty, I committed this murder. Now you are in my power. The produce of my guilt will at least be mine. Now you are in my power. The produce of my guilt will at last be mine. All right. I don't know what the hell that means, but as she comes to herself and realizes both where she is and the meaning of Ambrosio's transports, she resists. Unhand me, father, she cried, but Ambrosio will no longer be denied. You are absolutely in my power. Turn not on me those supplicating eyes. Can I relinquish these limbs so soft, so white, so soft, so delicate, these swelling breasts, round, full, and elastic, these lips fraught with such inexhaustible sweetnesses? Can I relinquish these treasures and leave them to another's enjoyment? No, Antonia, never, never! I swear it by this kiss, and this, and this. Antonia shrieks, squirms, struggles, but he, in the violence of his lustful delirium, is relentless until at last he gradually made himself master of her person. It's very good wording. Accomplishes his crime and the dishonor of Antonia. The ecstasy endures but a moment, and he is almost at once inspired with disgust. So deep is his self-loathing that it requires a victim. Again it is Antonia to whom he cries, You shall not from hence to tell Madrid that I am a villain. Wretched girl, you must stay here with me. Here amidst these lonely tombs, these images of death, these rotting, loathsome, corrupted bodies, here shall you stay and witness my suffering. Rarely in literature does a young man's fear of women emerge in quite so explicit a metaphor, and yet, though the rhetoric is wild, it is not inflated. The occasion deserves it. Corpses, female beauty, post-coital tryst, homosexual uncertainty, wind like the coils of a serpent around the thoroughly unconscious ego. It is the culminating masturbative vision. Lewis saw it clearly, and he saw it whole. The scene in which Antonia is dishonored is so terrific that her death at his hands a few minutes later is something of an anticlimax. But not so the account of his punishment, which rises again to delirious heights. Ambrosio is captured, accused, and convicted of his crimes and sentenced to die in an auto de fe. And now the reader learns that Matilda has all along been an agent of the devil, who has shared in his wickedness only in order to ensure his damnation. She offers him the opportunity to escape, but he must first sign with blood a contract with the devil. Good monk that he is, or has been, Ambrosio is fully aware of the meaning of such a contract and resists it to the absolutely penultimate moment when, hearing his executioner's steps, he snatches the pen from the demon's hand and signs. Immediately the demon grasped one of Ambrosio's arms, spread his broad pinions, and sprang with him into the air. Moments later, he finds himself in a tumultuous landscape of steep rocks, caverns, cliffs, and dark waters. Overhead can be heard the crying of eagles. In this barren wilderness, he learns that though the price was his immortal soul, freedom from prison and not safety was all it purchased from the demon, who, gloating, informs him that the Elvira he murdered was his own mother, that the Antonia whom he raped and slaughtered was, in fact, his sister, and that the guards he had heard coming to execute him came to signify your pardon, and that finally it was now time for Ambrosio to get what is coming to him. Villain, says the demon, resign your hopes of pardon. Thus I secure my prey. The fiend's talons grip the monk's shaven skull, and as the caves and mountains rang with Ambrosio's shrieks, he is borne aloft to an appalling height and dropped. Headlong fell the monk through the airy waste. The sharp point of a rock received him, and he rolled from precipice to precipice, till, bruised and mangled, he rested on the river's banks. Life still existed in his miserable frame. He attempted in vain to raise himself. His broken and dislocated limbs refused to perform their office, nor was he able to quit the spot where he had first fallen. The sun now rose above the horizon. Its scorching beams darted full upon the head of the expiring sinner. Myriads of insects were called forth by the warmth. They drank the blood which trickled from Ambrosio's wounds. He had no power to drive them from him, and they fastened upon his sores, darted their stings into his body, covered him with their multitudes, and inflicted on him tortures the most exquisite and insupportable. The eagles of the rock tore his flesh piecemeal and dug out his eyeballs with their crooked beaks. A burning thirst tormented him. He heard the river's murmur as it rolled beside him, but strove in vain to drag himself towards the sound. Blind, maimed, helpless, and despairing, venting his rage in blasphemy and curses, execrating his existence, yet dreading the arrival of death destined to yield him up to greater torments. 6 miserable days did the villain languish. On the 7th a violent storm arose. The winds in fury rent up rocks and forests. The sky was now black with clouds, now sheeted with fire. The rain fell in torrents. It swelled the stream. The waves overflowed their banks. They reached the spot where Ambrosio lay, and when they abated, carried with them into the river the corpse of the despairing monk. And I'm guessing it was supposed to be the corpse. But I don't know. The corpse might be a word I'm unfamiliar with. Now that is pretty good grizzly, and for that matter, it is pretty good morality too. Ambrosio, having turned out to be a very, very bad man, deserves a fate commensurate with his iniquity. Die, says the young novelist, as he destroys his too dear brainchild. Thus I finish you off, foul night walker in my dreams. You dared to do what I trembled to wish. Die, die. Thus I wake up. Take that, and that, and that, and most deliciously, I hate when people say deliciously, take that as well. No wonder that the book's first avid readers thought it was dirty. It was. It is. Foul, even beyond the rapture of bosoms and linnets, and the ivory elasticity of other flesh. So foul that the contemporary reader, to avoid knowing what Lewis is driven by, takes refuge in amusement at his last gasp prose style. The statuesque poses in which virtue and vice are displayed, the potions and cowls and poisons that in any case are only the reflexes of the Gothic imagination. When we are done smiling, we get a whiff of the same mist that carries Dracula first into a neighbor bedroom and then into one's own. Because, as Berryman observes, the main thing is there. The sceptered terror, Byron, sharing with his aides the judgment that The Monk was a dirty book, wrote that the worst parts ought to have been written by Tiberius at Capria. They are forced, the filtered ideas of a jaded voluptuary, but Byron is making a mournful error. Lewis's ideas are indeed filtered, but only through the lens of inexperience as it focuses deliberately on shifting desire. The novel triumphs just because Lewis has made that turgid, feverish, overwrought scrabbling to understand achingly clear. The Monk is the quintessential novel of ununderstood sexual compulsion, of the adolescent's vision of himself as longing in all possible directions, and his snatching at the most bearable fragments of his dreams to explain or to avoid explaining a bewildering array of hungers. The experience that mastered Lewis was youthful fear swollen by ignorance. With an extraordinary writer's instinct, he allowed his monsters to flow onto his page without interference, and became thereby the visionary of adolescence, that epoch in our lives when there are only towers looking down into abysses. That bleak time deserves its prophets too. Lewis is amongst the best of them, among the best of them. I actually have that book, and after that rendering, I'm probably going to read it. Horace Walpole's The Castle of Otranto, 1764, officially the first of the Gothic romances, is a much less nakedly self expressive, self concealing work than Lewis's The Monk. For one thing, it was written not by a boy, but by a middle aged, decadent monk. Is that what that is? Monk? A man of crotchety and exotic tastes, with wealth vast enough to indulge them. He was, according to one account, a tall, thin, unhealthy, pale 18th century gentleman with eyes strangely bright, who could imagine for himself and build a stone and plaster castle jam packed with medieval scraps of glass, statuary, and armor. It was called Strawberry Castle and was a quaint structure with towers, battlements, and saints in imitation Gothic windows, vaulted roofs, balustrades, stairways, and a vestibule open with 3 arches on the landing place. The castle, when finished, will have 32 windows enriched with painted glass. In the midst of this solemn bric-a-brac, a moody Walpole, disillusioned and is it Walpole or is it Walpole? Walpole, and exhausted by political and personal tension, dreamed a jumbled dream. Walpole himself tells us that he waked one morning in the beginning of last June from a dream in which all I could recover was that I had thought myself in an ancient castle. A very natural dream from a head like mine filled with Gothic story, and that on the uppermost banister of a great staircase I saw a gigantic hand in armor. In the evening I sat down to write. As with Lewis Walpole, one started on his story, was so engrossed he could not, except for needful intervals, put down his pen, and the work was finished in less than 2 months. Harrison R. Steeves writes that the Castle of Otranto is today somewhat difficult to take seriously, yet it is the ancient head, not fallen into disrepute, of an entire family of stories of its kind, good, bad, and indifferent, which includes the work as reputable authors as Poe, the Bronte sisters, and Stevenson. To Steve's cautious list, I would add the name of Bram Stoker, who, like Walpole, discovered his Dracula in a dream. As for Steve's word disrepute, that is an open matter. Otranto has been admired by men as various as Byron, Saintsbury, and extravagantly as always by Montague Summers, who claims that to it we owe nothing less than a revolution in public taste. It is hardly an exaggeration to say that to Walpole's romance is due the ghost story in the novel, containing so much of our supernatural and occult, that which no forms of literature are now, 1923, more common and applauded. I am myself fond of the book without being shaken by it. Reading it, I have the feeling that both Walpole and I are gratifying a genial curiosity, not about matters worthy of belief, but rather about the amusing possibilities of peculiarity. As an archetypal fiction, it is pretty lightweight, but it is archetypal nonetheless, and therefore worth a brief plot summary. To begin with, there is the despotic Manfred, Prince of Otranto, who rules his principality uneasily, fearing the accomplishment of an ancient prophecy, which was said to have pronounced that the castle and lordship of Otranto should pass from the present family whenever the real owner should be grown too large to inhabit it. The italics are Walpole's, as he gives a broad hint that Manfred's right to his title is questionable. Manfred, eager to secure his line of inheritance and legitimize his claim, has arranged the marriage between his sickly son Conrad and the Princess Isabella of Vicenza, who is related by descent to Alfonso the Good, a past ruler of Otranto. On the morning of the marriage, the feeble Conrad is found shattered to bits underneath an enormous helmet, which turns out to have come mysteriously from the statue of Alfonso. Manfred, moving with dispatch to avert the prophecy, vows to divorce his wife Hippolyta and to marry Isabella himself. Isabella, outraged at Manfred's disloyalty to his wife, and her heart already prepossessed by a handsome young peasant named Theodore, flies from the clutches of the tyrant via subterranean passages beneath the castle, hoping to find refuge in a nearby monastery. As the chase scenes transpire, a series of supernatural events is also taking place. In addition to the death-dealing helmet, other bits of gigantic armor are distributed in various parts of the castle. A portrait steps from its frame and walks. A statue bleeds 3 drops of blood from the nose. There is a portentous skeleton in a cowl. And finally, the castle itself tumbles down in a fit of heavenly rage. The wicked Manfred, in the course of his evil machinations, kills his daughter Matilda with a dagger stroke meant for the innocent Isabella. This murder brings the tyrant to contrition, and the peasant Theodore, who is not really a peasant, but rather a legitimate heir to the throne of Otranto, is installed in the place rightfully his own. Manfred and Hippolyta spend the rest of their lives in penitential religion, and Isabella outweighs Theodore's grief for the death of Matilda. Her patience is rewarded at last because Theodore is persuaded he could know no happiness but in the society of one with whom he could forever indulge the melancholy that had taken possession of his soul. Walpole, with a mind devoted to fairy tale and neurasthenia, had no trouble contriving this farrago. What is wonderful is that it more than occasionally works. Anne Radcliffe, the next great practitioner of the Gothic novel, is something of a prodigy. Only 25 when her first Pallid, a Sicilian romance, was published, she managed to write 3 other large books, 2 of them major achievements, before she was 33. Then she stopped. The 2 monumental novels, The Mysteries of Udolpho and the Italian, are quite different achievements. Udolpho is expansive, unhurried, majestic, sensible, and frequently fearful. But the Italian, her great work, has none of the vigariousness of Udolpho. It is focused and intense, charged with mysteries that may not be exercised by the gracious explanations that, I think, rob Udolpho of its power. But wherever Radcliffe puts her mind, she creates fascination by the chill tension that develops between her schoolmarm imagination and the terrors over which it plays. Leslie Fiedler says that the middle of Mrs. Radcliffe's book seem in their compulsive repetitiveness a self-duplicating nightmare from which it is impossible to wake. What makes the nightmare especially deadly is the impeccably reasonable prose in which Radcliffe encircles the reader. The effect is scary because one looks about prey to the suspicion that so much reason in the presence of towering or half destroyed castles of wind blowing through caves, cowering bandits, sinister convents and monasteries, mountain peaks, cataracts, trapdoors, veiled pictures, secret passages, corpses, blood-stained garments, depraved Italians. Reason maintained in the presence of all these can only be the face of madness frozen into a semblance of logic. It is Radcliffe's compelled domestication of the strange that makes her the idea precursor of arsenic and old lace, which is a way of saying that despite her drawing room prose with all of its longueurs, its unbending civility reflecting unchallengeable bourgeois notions of order and domesticity, her mind is just the same entangled in the question of evil. Anne Radcliffe, sitting side saddle on her well schooled mount, may be riding at a collected canter, but I think that neither she nor her reader is ever unaware that the gulf along whose rim she rides is shooting flames. In Edith Burkhead's The Tale of Terror, there is to be found a summary of the plot of Maturin's Melmoth the Wanderer, 1820, that is something of a tour de force. His hero is a modern Faustus who has bartered his soul with the powers of darkness for protracted life and unlimited worldly enjoyment. His heroine, a species of insular goddess, a virgin Calypso of the Indian Ocean who, amid flowers and foliage, lives upon figs and tamarinds, associates with peacocks and monkeys, is worshipped by the occasional visitants of her island, finds her way into Spain where she is married to the aforesaid hero by the hand of a dead hermit, the ghost of a murdered domestic being the witness of her nuptials, and finally dies in a dungeon of the Inquisition at Madrid. To complete this phantasmagoric exhibition, we are presented with sibyls and misers, parricides, maniacs in abundance, monks with scourges pursuing a naked youth streaming with blood, subterranean Jews surrounded by the skeletons of their wives and children, lovers blasted by lightning, Irish hags, Spanish grandees, shipwrecks, caverns, Donna Claras and Donna Isidoras, all exposed to each other in violent and glaring contrast, and all their adventures narrated with the same undeviating display of turgid, vehement, and painfully elaborated language. How many more pages? 170. I got 12 more flopping pages. This is not inexcusably warped summary, and for 1821 gratifyingly terse. What it fails to do is to convey the extraordinary seriousness of the Irish clergyman's book. Maturin could hardly refrain from using the breathless machinery that from the beginning was a fixed attribute of the Gothic. Melmoth, the Wanderer, more than any of its predecessors, is a complex vision of personal damnation. Melmoth is certainly the Byronic hero, villain, the wandering outlaw of his own dark mind, but the world through which he moves is as bleak as the soul that moves him. Maturin's vision is of a wasteland in which desperately guilt-ridden men and women torment and feed upon each other. There is a scene in which one of the book's many villains says, "The true penitent rushes over the mangled members of nature and passion, collects them with a hand in which there is no pulse, and a heart in which there is no feeling, and holds them up in the face of the divinity as a peace offering. Mine is the best theology, the theology of utter hostility to all beings whose sufferings may mitigate mine." In another, an imprisoned, loving couple, grown desperate with hunger and darkness, learn to detest each other. All the horrible and loathsome excruciations of famine had been undergone, the disunion of every tie of the heart, of passion, of nature, had commenced. They could have cursed each other. It was on the fourth night that I heard the shriek of the wretched female. Her lover had fastened his teeth in her shoulder. That bosom on which he had so often luxuriated became a meal to him now. Repulsive as all this is, Maturin is interested in something more abstract. Time and the use of time are the twin themes of his book. Melmoth's tragic error is that he bought time at the cost of his soul, to live longer than the rest of us in a world already a purgatory. Without his bad bargain, he might have died and taken his chances with unpredictable mercies of heaven. As it is, we have a pretty sharp sense of what waits for a Melmoth when he dies, because we are given an account of a dream he has on the night before his 150-year tenure in this world is up. It is a scene as dreadful as that which waited the luckless Ambrosio. He stood on the summit of a precipice whose downward height no eye could have measured, but for the fearful waves of a fiery ocean that lashed and blazed and roared at its bottom, sending its burning spray far up, so as to drench the dreamer with its sulphurous rain. The whole glowing ocean below was alive. Every billow bore an agonizing soul that rose like a wreck or a putrid corpse on the waves of earth's oceans, uttered a shriek as it burst against the adamantine precipice, sunk and rose again. To repeat the tremendous experiment, the wanderer stood in his dream, tottering on a crag, midway down the precipice. He looked upward, but the upper air, for there was no heaven, showed only blackness, unshadowed and impenetrable. But blacker than that blackness, he could distinguish a gigantic outstretched arm that held him as in sport on the ridge of that infernal precipice, while another that seemed in its motions to hold, while another that seemed in its motions to hold fearful and invisible conjunction with the arm that grasped him, as if both belonged to some being too vast and horrible even for the imagery of a dream to shape, pointed upwards to a dial plate fixed on the top of that precipice, and which the flashes of the ocean of the fire made fearfully conspicuous. He saw the mysterious single hand revolve. He saw it reach the appointed period of 150 years. For in this mystic plate centuries were marked, not hours. He shrieked in his dream, and with that strong impulse, often felt in sleep, burst from the arm that held him to arrest the motion of the hand. In the effort he fell, and falling grasped at aught that might save him. His last despairing, reverted glance was fixed on the clock of eternity. The upraised black arm seemed to push forward the hand. It arrived at its period. He fell, he sunk, he blazed, he shrieked. The burning waves boomed over his sinking head, and the clock of eternity rung out its awful chime. Room for the soul of the wanderer! And the waves of the burning ocean answered as they lashed the adamantine rock. There is room for more. The wanderer awoke. The wanderer's physical death is much cooler. His handkerchief is found caught in furs. The hell is furs? Where it whips about in the breeze that sweeps a seaside cliff. That was the last trace of the wanderer. Despair, says Maturin, has no diary. He is mistaken. Literature is the repository of many. Melmoth the Wanderer is one of the sternest. I am in my car on a bit of a blacktop on sort of a bluff overlooking the students' parking lot at Pleasant Park School, where I have been invited to talk about vampires. Pleasant Park is a bedroom suburb about 30 miles from San Francisco. The sun is directly in front of me, its rays making the raindrops sparkle where they cling to the winter silent walnut trees the developers have let stand. Mozart's Trout Quintet comes out of the loudspeakers in my radio as my eye, he only has one eye apparently, travels over the hills and woods that make Pleasant Park so pleasant. Music, sunlight, and the parking lot. What a heavy weight of machinery the children drive to school. A bell rings and they are out in the forecourt of the school. Scores of teenagers, gangly if they are boys, hesitant and looking older if they are girls. The boys wear blue jeans, their hands stuck into the front pockets. In the interval between classes, they stand around in the weak sunlight, waiting. pardon my nose trumpets. I too am waiting for 10:30 to come around when I will tell them all about vampires. Meanwhile, several of them drift off from the larger group to their cars, as if they were in a spy movie that required them to make discreet exits. As in the film, the discretion is overdone and calls attention to itself. The cars fill silently with one, two, three, six secretive boys. Then the motors race. The cars are gone, off to sinister privacies. As I leave my car, the quintet is finished. I turn off KKHI, playing Franz Liszt's Polonaise. As I slam the car door, I hear a familiar cry. Seagulls, here, inland, wheeling over the soaked lawns of the high school. But not with the hysterical energy they exhibited in Whitby, where Dracula's ship in Stoker's novel is driven aground and the master vampire arrives in England in the form of an enormous dog. In Whitby, it was church bells and fish that set the seagulls screaming. At lunch with the two girls assigned to be my guides, I learn again about the wily adolescent. Marie, the taller of my two guides, is 17. She has the look of inner misery that seems standard for a pretty American girl in high school, but she is good humored about it and says she is merely desperate. Nothing that moving to some place away from Pleasant Park won't cure. She gives me no details about her troubles except that she hates the suburbs. Instead, she turns the conversation to Bonnie's problems. Bonnie, looking as blonde, blue-eyed, and fresh-cheeked as the Coca-Cola girls of my generation, looks up as if given the signal she was waiting for, and almost before I can ask a question, I get her whole story along with my second cup of dreadful high school cafeteria coffee. She is 15 and a half years old and isn't interested in graduating because she's heard of a program where she can study to be a veterinary's assistant, something important to her because she is planning to be a rancher's wife. She has already found the rancher over in Walnut Creek, but there is a catch. He is married and has two children. It doesn't matter, says Bonnie. He's getting a divorce so he can marry me. What? His name is Jimmy. He's rich, good looking, and 32 years old. He is, as well as a cattle rancher, something of a horse fancier, which is how Bonnie met him. Bonnie has a reputation as a horse trainer. Jimmy, looking about for someone to work with a dangerous stallion, heard about her and called her in. Bonnie says, well, that Satan was a mean damned horse. I worked on him for a couple of weeks, but I had to give it up. He was a killer, and finally Jimmy got rid of him. When the horse was gone, I stayed on. Why? For the minute I saw his wife, I knew Jimmy didn't love her. I could see he liked me, so I stayed. She doesn't want him anyway. She hates him. The teacher's cafeteria in which we sit buzzes with the voices of people Bonnie is deceiving. I asked her how she manages to keep an affair like hers a secret from her teachers and parents. The teachers are easy. All they want is for me to do the schoolwork. And I've got them psyched out. I know what they want, and I give it to them. I've got a straight A record. My parents, well, I guess I do the same to them. I used to fight back, always saying no to them. Now I just give in. Whatever they want, I say yes. What difference does it make? I go to church on Sunday and I help my mother in the kitchen. And then I'm doing well at school, so they figure everything has to be okay. But don't they notice you're going out with boys your own age? You're not going out with boys your own age? Well, you see, I do. I've got these guys, We've got it worked out. They're my fake dates. They come and pick me up like we're going to a show or a dance, and they drive me up the hill, and there's Jimmy waiting for me. What about when you get home? Well, don't you see? My folks think I'm a good girl, so they're asleep by the time I get back. I wait, wondering how much of a Dutch uncle I can bear to be. How do you know, I say slowly, that Jimmy is serious about you? Oh, he's serious, she says. Damn serious. Because he could be sent to jail for doing the things you do. We do. You think? Bonnie, a rosy-cheeked, blonde, blue-eyed, not yet 16-year-old girl, whose baby fat is still part of her prettiness, unlike Marie, who is merely desperate, whose wit reaches me like friendship, Bonnie is engrossed in her drama. A girl who isn't frightened to work with a killer horse named Satan is likely to be serene and stupid in clever Jimmy's arms. There is a literary evening well known in the history of the Gothic tale when Byron, Monk, Lewis, Dr. John Polidori, Percy, and Mary Shelley, not the Mary Shelley, and Mary Shelley gathered together at the Villa Diodati and the environs of Geneva. It was a wet, ungenial summer, and the incessant rain often confined their evenings around a blazing wood fire where they amused themselves with some German stories of ghosts, which happened to fall into their hands. In the course of the evening, Byron proposed that each of them undertake to make a scary tale. Only two of the group fulfilled their assignment. Dr. John Polidori and Mary Shelley. Mary Shelley, still only 17, took advantage of a dream that handed her a plot and dashed off Frankenstein. Polidori, in turn, concocted The Vampire, a tale. The consequences for us are only too visible on any night, on any movie or television screen in the land. Polidori was 24 when he gave us The Vampire. He was dead at 26 of an overdose of drugs. His tale does not, however, have that breathless sense of truth being discovered that can characterize young writing. His style affects a weary sophistication and achieves a pale version of it. What Polidori set into motion in his wicked Lord Ruthven was the Byronic hero seen as a destroyer of more than himself, and that is a considerable contribution. Moreover, Polidori gave us the prototype vampire as, at least in English literature, we will get him ever after. That is to say, as a nobleman, aloof, brilliant, chilling, fascinating to women, and coolly evil. I find it hard to know why women should find attractive a man with a dead gray eye, who gazed upon the mirth around him as if he could not participate therein, and who could by a look throw fear into those breasts where thoughtlessness reigned. But, oh my God, 8 more pages. But Polidori wishes us to believe that despite the deadly lure of his face, which never gained a warmer tint, many of the female hunters, after notoriety, attempted to win his attention, nor was it only vicious females who pursued him. Even the ones who formed the boast of their sex from their domestic virtues were charmed by his winning tongue. That is Lord Ruthven, the villain. There is also a young gentleman named Aubrey, who is the male ingenue of the tale. Aubrey is good-looking, virtuous, honorable, rich, and innocent enough not to spurn Ruthven's friendship. Indeed, they set out on the continental grand tour together, in the course of which Aubrey learns that Lord Ruthven has a penchant for ruining decent people at the gaming table and for succoring the wicked poor. When Aubrey learns that Ruthven is about to seduce a girl living in Rome, he informs the girl's mother and breaks off his own relationship with the enigmatic lord. In Athens, where Aubrey then goes to study the inscriptions of ancient tombs, he meets Ianthe, who is so beautiful and delicate that she might have formed the model for a painter, wishing to portray on canvas the promised hope of the faithful in Mahomet's paradise. Ianthe, who is one of those sylph-like creatures the romantic movement has taught us not to believe in, chases butterflies and allows the whole beauty of her form, floating as it were upon the wind, to impress itself on Aubrey's eager gaze. It is Ianthe who tells Aubrey tales of the living vampire, who, past years amidst his friends and dearest ties, forced every year by feeding upon the life of every female to prolong his existence. Aubrey, of course, cannot believe the stories until one day he comes upon a ravished Ianthe. Upon her neck and breast was blood, and upon her throat were the marks of teeth. Having opened the vein, the sight sent him once more into shock. When he recovers, he finds himself being tended by Ruthven, who no longer appeared that apathetic being he had known. Too weak to resist Ruthven's advances, Aubrey allows their friendship and their travels to be renewed. In the course of them, Ruthven is killed in an encounter with bandits. Before dying, Ruthven swears his young friend to keep secret for 1 year after his death the details of his own former crimes. Aubrey gives his oath, then Ruthven asks to be left lying in a position where his body should be exposed to the first cold ray of the moon that rose after his death. On his return to England some months later, he is horrified Lord to discover Lord Ruthven in a London drawing room, once again at his foully fascinating best. Ruthven reminds the distracted Aubrey of his oath, and the young man then endures the horror of watching his sister, courted by the man he is now sure is the vampire that destroyed Ianthe. The pressure on Aubrey becomes at last too much. His helpless sister, courted by a vampire, himself kept by his oath from warning her. He lapses into incoherence and is believed to be mad. On the midnight of the day preceding his sister's marriage, the time during which Aubrey is bound to silence is over, but he is already dying as he informs his guardians of the truth about Ruthven. By then it was too late. Lord Ruthven had disappeared, and Aubrey's sister had glutted the thirst of a vampire. Polidori's world-weary mood does much to spoil a plot otherwise rather interesting, and that's a pity because it would be pleasant to report that Ruthven is a fit ancestor for Count Dracula. He is not, and except for its place as the first vampire tale in English, the vampire would deserve oblivion. The trouble is that Polidori does not write out of either necessity or conviction. Ianthe's ectoplasmic loveliness is too vaporous to excite admiration. Aubrey's frequent relapses into emotional incompetence are just as dull. As for the melancholy, Miss Aubrey, she seems a most moist version. She seems a moist version of a very minor Jane Austen character. Mary in Pride and Prejudice, for example. Her blue eye, another Cyclops, was never lit up by the levity of the mind beneath. Her step was not that light footing which strays wherever a butterfly or a color may attract. It was sedate and pensive. When alone, her face was never brightened by the smile of joy. And though she does not quite deserve her fate, it was no doubt the most exciting thing that ever happened to her. What emerges from the scores of vampire stories and poems that appear throughout the 19th century until the appearance of Stoker's Dracula is the sense of a mosaic being built in various parts of Europe by writers who in varying degree understood what they were doing as they worked at the theme. I have not space enough to deal with the many excellent treatments of the idea, but some deserve noting and others a bit more than passing mention. Johann Ludwig Tieck's Wake Not the Dead, 1800, is a marvelous tale, which no doubt was in Poe's mind when he set himself to work on his Ligeia. But better still for my purposes, Tieck's story moves somberly and steadily into the very center of sexual allegory. Tieck, with a fine appreciation for the dread power of sex, tells the story of Walter, a Burgundian lord who loses to death the magnificent Brunhilde, whose beauty far surpassed in loveliness all her rivals, for her tresses, dark as the raven face of night, streaming over her shoulders, set off to the utmost advantage the beginning luster of her slender form. While she lived, Walter and Brunhilde abandoned themselves to the enjoyment of a passion that rendered them reckless of aught besides. The trouble is that the spoiler death intervenes and Walter is left a widower, but impetuous as was his first burst of grief, he was not inconsolable, for ere long another bride became the partner of the youth. This time the bride is Swanhilde. Lots of Hildas. Pallid and passive Swanhilde, whose golden locks waved bright as the beams of morn. Her limbs were proportioned in the nicest symmetry, yet did they not possess the luxuriant fullness of animal life. For Walter, whose fevers are all erectile, Swanhilde's steady, decent, chilly domestication is finally more than he can stand, and he takes to lying on Brunhilde's grave, getting such consolation as he can from memories of their wilder nights. Finally, his deep desiring is so intense that a sorcerer who passes by, not by chance, allows himself to be persuaded to bring Brunhilde back to life. The cost of the miracle is dreadful. Brunhilde, restored to the arms of her husband, although she is animated, is not alive. She has, says Teak, an artificial life, yet this body was not able of itself to keep up the genial flow of vitality and to nourish the flame whence springs all affections and passions. All that Brunhilde now possessed was a chilled existence, colder than that of the snake. Teak is specific. The nutriment that keeps her going is blood, because it was necessary that she should love, and return with equal ardor the warm caresses of her spell enthralled husband. And this is why she needs human blood imbibed, whilst yet warm from the veins of youth. For a time, Walter is, or pretends to be, insensible to the ravages her thirst creates among his vassals' children, and even among his own. Brunhilde is, however, so insatiable that finally she takes to supplying directly at Walter's bosom while he lies in the trance. She induces in all of her victims who dream marvelously while their lives ebb away. One night, Walter, who has tasted a bitter herb that is an antidote to her spell, wakes to find her at his breast, her lips besmeared with blood. He accuses her. Monster, is it thus that you love me? She replies splendidly, Aye, even as the dead love. Then, with the icy logic, she reminds him that he is the true murderer because I was obliged to pamper myself with warm youthful blood in order that I might satisfy thy furious desires. Thou hadst the courage to love the dead, to take into thy bed one whom had been sleeping in the grave, the bedfellow of the worm. Overcome by what she says, he flies, not flirts, flies from her embrace. After a period of anguish, Walter, counseled by the sorcerer, rids himself of his succubus by the simple expedient of murder, but her memory continues to haunt him, and he wanders like Cain, a prey to gloomy terrors, until one night he meets a female figure clad in black, who bore a raven on her hand, and who so wonderfully did resemble Swan Hilda, except that her looks were brown and her eyes dark and full of fire, that he does not long delay his nuptials with the fair unknown, who reassures him that he is not really a criminal for having destroyed Brunhilde. For thou couldst not deprive that of life which properly had none. Once again, Walter's castle resounds with mirth and revelry, the wild, tumultuous uproar of unrestrained riot. At the height of Walter's new delirium, as he is about to clasp his bride to his bosom, she transforms herself into a serpent, which, entwining him in its horrid folds, crushed him to death. While the castle sinks with a horrid crash, and a voice exclaimed aloud, Wake not the dead! Teak's Wake Not the Dead, short as it is, makes a tremendous ache in the mind. Sad and incompetent as she is to be Walter's wife, Swanhilda nevertheless is given the last word that counts. Hast thou rashly dared to tear aside the awful veil that separates the mortality that dreams from that which dreameth not? Oh, then woe to thee, thou wretched man. On the other hand, Thomas Prest's Varney, the Vampire, 1853, which goes rollicking through gore for 800 double-columned pages, produces no pain at all. In Chapter 3, I've already given some sense of Prest's prose, and for lack of a better word, his vision. Lurid is the word for both, and yet Varney the Vampire is grand guignol, writing at its childlike best. Perhaps only an old lecher writing out fantasies that have kept his fingers straying longingly to his crotch over many years could surpass Prest's enthusiasm for maidens who fixed their eyes upon the face of Varney with the strange glassy-looking eyes that had glared upon her on that awful night of the storm when she was visited by the vampire. Pardon. The maiden Flora listens to him tell her, You are beautiful. The most cunning statuary might well model some rare work of art from those rounded limbs. Your skin rivals the driven snow. 868 pages, glaring, blaring, staring, from the very sound of the title to the last shriek as Varney disappeared into the mountain. Prest adores the horror he is mouthing. The title alone is and was worth its weight in gold. It sounds immediately every conceivable note of flatulence. The hundreds of pages that follow will play on. Varney the Vampire, or The Feast of Blood. The effect is splendid. Tinsel thunder, cellophane lightning, death, blood, gore, pistol shots, stabbings, caves, moonlight resurrections. Indeed, Varney is resurrected so frequently that the idea of dying takes on a thoroughly ludicrous aspect. When I die, would you mind rolling me over to that corner where the moon is shining, please? Who can resist so harmless a request? Varney is shot, hanged, staked, drowned. It doesn't matter. All he requires is a little bit of moonlight to make his corpse twitch and jerk. Before long, he is among the living again, feeling the revival of an old thirst. I was ruminating what I should do until a strange feeling crept over me that I should like what? Blood! Raw blood! Reeking and hot, bubbling and juicy from the veins of some gasping victim. Varney, it should be observed, is frequently given an opportunity to sport the colors of a Byronic hero. That is to say, he loathes himself nearly as much as he is loathed. On Varney, these colors do not look so good, and has it come to this, he said, is this my work? Oh, horror, horror unspeakable. I am inclined to think that it is a horror only too speakable, and that nothing in the world will stop Thomas Prescott Prest from describing its most succulent details, nor does Prest shrink from taking on huge theological problems in his swift, off-hand manner. Mr. Bevan, the kind gentleman who at the end of Varney's career befriends him, remarks, I question not the decrees of heaven, if it seems fit to the great ruler of heaven and of earth that there should be ever such horrible creatures as vampires. Ought I, his creature, to question it? Varney replies, you ought not. I am a vampire. And when Mr. Bevan has absorbed the astonishing truth, he asks Varney hopefully, have you tried prayer? Prest himself seems dismayed by the ineffectuality of this consolation, and sends his Varney off to immolate himself in the lavas of Mount Vesuvius as the better way. There Varney, tired and disgusted with the life of horror, flung himself in to prevent the possibility of a reanimation of his remains. I do not believe, as Sir Devendra P. Varma does, that the impact of Varney the Vampire upon our literature is still felt through its reverberations in Dracula. The two books are on quite different planes of achievement. Varney is penny-a-line fiction at the very top of its bent, and one may be grateful to find the book available again as an example of what our not fully literate great-great-grandparents read when they wanted to course their blood a bit on cold, windy nights. But there is nothing in Varney, nothing at all, that is capable of sounding anything like the chords of dark understanding that reverberate in page after page of Stoker's Dracula. And mercifully, that is the end of chapter 5, which was way too bloody long. Good, but way too long. All right, Bob, that's all for now. Goodbye.